But speaking of being afraid, fear is a big thing. In all of this stuff that's going on, fear is the motivation. What is terrorism? Terrorism, Brother Copeland talks about that quite a bit, but terrorism is the planned, organized use of fear as a weapon. That's the definition that Yahweh gave to Brother Copeland back right after 9/11. And, terrorism is when people are using that fear to hold people captive. It's not even that there is necessarily a constant attack that they're doing, but just the threat of it, just the idea of it, it causes people to live in fear. I don't know how many people after 9/11, since 9/11, won't fly on airplanes. And that's fear. That's fear holding them in bondage. But as believers, we need to know how to deal with fear. It's prevalent in society, like especially now. We saw it during the pandemic. How much fear was driving that whole thing? Fear is often irrational. It's often out of proportion to the actual threat. I mean, taking the pandemic for an example, okay? Less than 1% chance of most people being taken out by the illness. Less than 1% chance. But yet, the entire society as we knew it was brought to a standstill over it. And fear, you could feel the fear just walking around in the supermarket. You could feel the fear on everybody. And people saying to me, well, you're not going to get the remedy for that because you're concerned it might have some side effects. You're going to risk dying. Yeah, considering I have less than a 1% chance of dying from it, And some of those same people now, in hindsight, say, oh, you know what, you were right. And it was so much fear that was driving it. But that was just a taste of the end times. So many, you just go and you read in Matthew 24 and Luke 21 and how much Yeshua talks about, like, the men's of hearts will fail. The hearts of men will fail. The hearts of men will fail because of expecting what's coming on the earth. Not even what's actually happening. It's fear of what's coming on the earth. Yes, fear is false evidence appearing real. And so much of the fears that even, and every one of us, I'm sure, have at some point in our life had to deal with some fear. And if we can look at it in hindsight, we can see the irrationality of it. We can see, why was I afraid of something like that? What was it that was behind it? The Brother Copeland had written this book, Freedom from Fear, and I believe back in the beginning of the pandemic, Dad had passed these out to everybody. We still have some if someone did not receive a copy of this. This is a very, very good little book. This is a very good book that you can keep in your pocketbook or whatever. You got to keep it in front of you. You got to have the weapons. You got to have the weapons of your warfare. Like Mom said before, you got to sleep in your armor. Well, you got to always have the resources. You got to have the word night and day ready to fight the battles, because fear doesn't pick and choose times to come. Fear can come at any point and try to show up at your door with a suggestion. And that's often what it starts with. Terry Mize wrote an excellent book called More Than Conquerors, and I already read that growing up. If you haven't read it, I encourage you to go get it. That man has gone to some of the most dangerous places in South America and Mexico, and as a missionary, walked through some things where he was held up at gunpoint, and all these things happened, and he supernaturally overcame these situations, but he had to deal with fear first. You got to deal with the fear in order to walk through the fire without the smell of smoke. You got to deal with the fear in order to sleep in the lion's den. Daniel was in the lion's den. He was not screaming about the lions. The angel had shut their mouth, but he had to do his part. He could not be walking in fear in that. almost 100 years ago, at a time when America was economically at its worst, President Franklin Roosevelt recognized the power of fear to terrorize and paralyze everyday Americans. He led the United States into what he likened to an all-out war against the Great Depression. And he made his declaration of war with these familiar words. "Let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror, which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance." See, so fear will hold an army back. Fear will paralyze people. Fear, if it's tolerated, will contaminate your faith. Fear tolerated is faith contaminated. You can't say that you're walking in faith when you're captured by fear. And you're fooling yourself. And Brother Copeland was in Washington, D.C. just after, 9/11. And that's when he said, the Holy Spirit told him, you are to launch a war on fear. Well, that war has not stopped. If anything, it's increased because the times are of it. And he said, and I want you to strip the fear out of the body of Yeshua. My people have no business with fear. We've got to get the fear out of the church. You can't tolerate it anymore in your life. And so, just like it was then, as clear then after 9/11, it's still just as clear today. Fear is not something that's at all healthy. It's destructive. You hear some people, well, a little fear is good. No, a little fear will contaminate your faith. A little poison in your brownies will, I chose a little more kosher thing. A little poison in your brownies, yeah, mom says something else. A little poison in your brownies, it contaminates the whole batch. There are some poisoning. That's not the subject of today. But fear is destructive. A little of it will contaminate your whole life. You ever notice that fear doesn't stay in just the area it starts in? It starts to spread. And if you allow a fear to take over one part of your life, it will start becoming bigger and bigger, but your circle will start becoming smaller and smaller and smaller. It will start spreading. Fear is not something that we need to learn to live with. We're not to cope with it. Fear is not something we are to tolerate. It's something we eliminate. We've got to get rid of it, root it out, and get rid of it all. Let's turn over to Hebrews chapter 2. I know we've talked a number of times about the subject of fear, but it is so relevant to today. So we keep circling back around to it. Hebrews chapter 2. We go down to, we'll start down at verse 13. And again he says, my trust and assured reliance and confident hope shall be fixed in him. And yet again, here am I and the children who God has given me. Since therefore these his children share in flesh and blood, in the physical nature of human beings, he, talking about Yeshua, himself in a similar manner partook of the same nature, that by going through death, he might bring to naught and make of no effect him who had the power of death. Notice it says had. The devil has no power over death anymore. Had the power of death, that is the devil, and also that he might deliver and completely set free all those who through the haunting fear of death were held in bondage throughout the whole course of their lives. So right there, Yeshua came to set people free. And it says deliver and completely set free. He wants you to be completely set free from all fear in your life. And all fear goes back. It traces its roots in the fear of death. When was the first time fear is mentioned in the Bible? It was after the fall, when Adam and Eve hid themselves from the presence of the Lord because they were afraid of him. Where did the fear come from? The fear came from knowledge of sin. So since sin came into the world, death came through sin, and fear came through the same vein. So all fear traces its roots back to the fear of death. You can say, well, I'm not really afraid to die. Maybe you're not afraid of death itself, but you're afraid of the way in which the death comes. Okay? So you're afraid of the pain of death, or the pain of something that could kill you. That's what it traces its roots back to. 2 Timothy 1 verse 7 says, "For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and a sound mind." You know, people who are in the grip of fear don't have a sound mind. You know, you think of all the soldiers who have come back from war and they have PTSD. Well, what is that? That's fear that has taken a grip on their life, but to the extent where it's affecting their mental health, it's affecting their mind. But God has given us the power and love and a sound mind. You can keep your head in the midst of the tragedies that are going on in this world. You can keep your head in the midst of the fear that the enemy is trying to send your way. He gives you that power. 1 John 4:18 in the Amplified says, "There is no fear in love. Dread does not exist, but full-grown, complete, perfect love turns fear out of doors and expels every trace of terror." You know, and when it's talking about love, we need to be more confident in the fact that Yahweh loves us. If we truly knew that he loved us and he's walking with us in every situation, there would be no need to fear. He's the biggest thing there. You know, it's like if you were walking through a dark place and when you were a little child and your father was walking through there. It causes you to be a little more, or it should cause you to be a little more secure and feeling, oh, my dad's got this. You know, he's got this. He's handling this for me. That should be how we walk through life with Yahweh on our side. If he's on our side, nothing can be against us. But given the chance, the devil, Satan, like any enemy, will try to use fear to contaminate our faith and confidence. He's going to try. We already know that's his MO. That's his plan from the beginning, is to put fear into us. And if he succeeds in putting that fear into us, over time it will weaken our faith. It might not happen just like that, but it will start to knock the roots out from our faith. And the strategy behind fear that the enemy has is to neutralize our faith by eroding our confidence in Yahweh and his love for us. That's all he's got to go on. If he can erode the confidence, I mean, that's how he got people to sin in the beginning, to erode their confidence that Yahweh loved them and had their best interest in mind. If he can infiltrate your faith, he can regain control of every aspect of your life, even if you're born again. Even if you have a covenant, if you're not walking in the covenant and keeping the enemy out, he will, you give him an inch, he'll take a mile. Fear is dangerous. Fear is a matter of life and death. You know, we know the importance of no fear in battles. I came across this article, and it's interesting because it was written by scientists who work with the military. Now, you don't tend to think of science and military going hand in hand, but the military has started looking into research with scientists to find out, how do we handle fear in our troops? And how do we get rid of it? So this article starts out, it's 2 a.m. on the Navy destroyer USS Traer, and the air is thick with the smell of fuel and 350 sweaty recruits who have been working too many hours. It's another long, monotonous shift of the routine maintenance when suddenly the night is ripped open by the piercing wail of an emergency alarm. The Traer is under attack. The explosions rock the ship as fire burns. The men and women of the crew scrambled through mangled compartments, and lights flicker and turbines whine. And the relentless scream of the alarm tells everybody what they already know. They are at war. except it's not. As the recruits battle flame and rising waters and treat the wounded, naval petty officers stand by, observing and evaluating the performance. The officers can retain almost eerily unflustered amidst the chaos because the attack and the ship itself are simulated. Dubbed the most not blessed ship in the Navy, the USS Traer is under siege nearly every day at its mooring in a 90,000-gallon tank inside a cavernous building at the Recruit Training Command in Illinois. This long night of fire and flood, the exercise lasts 12 hours and runs through 17 different scenarios. It is the elaborate and exhausting culmination of 8 weeks of training. Every year, 37,000 recruits are subjected to the high-tech terror of the Traer. This is supposed to feel real, says this PhD Navy senior psychologist who headed the team that designed the $60 million landlocked ship. This is supposed to scare the recruits. Now, why would they develop something that is supposed to scare them? You find out. Mission accomplished. After his night in the ship, seaman recruit Bailey emerges from the Traer weary and streaked with soot. We were all scared and stressed out, he said. He boarded the Traer for training last summer and panicked when he had to step into smoke so thick he couldn't see. But the 20-year-old from Eagle, Idaho, fought through his fear and kept going. Weeks of study, how to fight fire, how to move wounded, had left him more prepared than he knew. See, you got to know your training. The training comes first. You got to know how to handle situations. I learned I can trust my training, he says. I know there will be other times when it's real, when it goes a step further, and I might be scared. But in that moment, I hope I do what I did on the Traer. The military counts on it. Each branch uses high-tech simulations. Battle Mind, now called resilience training, is an Army and Marine Corps exercise in which troops inside a Humvee experience an IED attack and firefight. These exercises do more than train scared recruits to function amidst the chaos and destruction of combat. They also serve as a kind of boot camp introduction to the potentially damaging effects of fear and anxiety. The Department of Defense also wants to prevent PTSD. See, the whole idea is we don't want to have all of our soldiers coming back from battle with PTSD. And they're a wreck. Yeah. How do we prevent it? So they've turned to brain science for answers. The ultimate goal, to create more mentally resilient soldiers and sailors, combatants armed with what one DoD-funded research calls warrior brains. You gotta have a warrior brain. Fear is the enemy, says the commander. The mental stress of war has claimed more casualties in Iraq and Afghanistan than bombs and bullets. Psychological trauma can have profound negative effects on brain function. The nature of our post-9/11 conflicts, enemy combatants embedded among civilian populations using unconventional tactics and weapons like IEDs has been especially hard on soldiers. They are in combat more frequently with an enemy that uses terror as a weapon. So it's not like wartime of the past. This PhD who works with them, she has spent years tossing volunteers with sensors all over their bodies out of airplanes. Now that sounds fun. Her Navy-funded research measures physical fear responses, comparing sheer fright factors to the results of mental processing tests that she administers before, during, and after the skydiving flight. She has discovered that in most cases, the brain does some predictable things. When a human jumps out of a perfectly good airplane, that's just not normal. So your brain is going to react some way to that. And if it doesn't, then something's wrong with you. I'm just saying, if there's not some reaction, you're just like, oh, this is great. There's something wrong with you. Stress hormones flood the fear response system, and thoughts narrowly focus on one thing: getting out of the air and onto the ground. That is the goal. That is the goal. I am going to get out of the air onto the ground. safely in one piece. There are, however, the unflappable few subjects who don't experience this wild swing of mental and physical reactions. They demonstrate some of their clearest thinking in the middle of the plunge, and when it's over, their fear response systems quickly return to normal. Using brain scans, she has seen how the fear response system cools down faster in warrior brains than it does in the brains of more vulnerable subjects. A person with an incapacitating fear response is a danger to himself, his team, and the mission. Identifying the most resilient members of the U.S. military has been the business of the Navy SEALs for the past 50 years. Just to earn the rights to try out for the legendary program, a candidate must be exceptionally tough in body and in mind. The chosen few must then survive up to 18 months of training, so physically and mentally arduous that nearly 80% of this superior group of sailors never get past the 4th week. 80% never make it past the 4th week. That's how intense this training is. So who makes it and who's washed out? The answer lies not in bicep size or in speed, but in a cognitive test the would-be SEALs take on induction day. The test measures 24 different personality traits, but the results of the adversity tolerance section, which explores how the candidates respond to extreme stress, are the best best predicts who makes the cut. So how do you respond to stressful situations? That will tell you whether you're cut out to be a SEAL or not. There are people who make a negative loop about the situation they are placed in, says the SEAL psychologist. Those are people who can't cope. It's the people who take control of stressful challenges in any environment, he said, who will eventually wear the SEAL uniform. You got to know how to take control of your emotions, take control of the situation, no matter how stressful the environment, no matter what's going on around you. You've got to keep your head straight. It's the intense stress management training, he said, that turns a tough sailor into a SEAL. Weeding out the less resilient candidates is just the first step. He describes the classified SEAL training program as highly mental. It uses techniques that you can find in some other self-help books. Of course, SEAL candidates have to apply these methods while sleep-deprived, physically exhausted, during live-fire combat exercises, and much of the SEAL training is performed underwater with instructors intentionally creating obstacles and cutting off air supply to panic the recruits. I'm going to stress you as much as I can to find out how you respond. But you know what? People can look at, oh, that's so cruel. You shouldn't try to put fear in people. You want to find out how they're going to respond in a controlled environment before you put them out on a battlefield. Especially when you're talking about the Navy SEALs, who we know they've been sent to some of the most elite missions. You don't want that soldier to collapse in the midst of that situation and be unable to handle the fear. Well, we're all Navy SEALs in the spirit. That's what Yahweh has us in training for. Warriors. Our training is all about worst case scenarios and pushing us to the limits, he said. You stand a much better chance of mentally withstanding war if you can visualize it and prepare your brain for it than if you've never thought of it and never been able to picture it. That's what training is all for. You don't just take them right out of high school. They graduate high school, take these high school grads and go plop them on the battlefield. That's not a very good way to win a war. The proof is in the numbers. It's very rare for a SEAL to be diagnosed with PTSD. Now that's interesting. People say, well, it's because of what they see. Well, they've seen the same type of things, but it's rare for them to be diagnosed with it because they're able to handle it. They're able to handle it. They put it in its right perspective, and they're able to handle whatever they see. Anxiety does not equal mortal danger, is what they learn. Back on the trayer, the attack continues. Operating from a command center in the belly of the vessel, special effects engineers orchestrate the sights, sounds, and smells of naval warfare, pressing buttons to create explosions and fires. Ceiling fans blow ocean-scented breezes, and recordings of gull cries echo above the bridge. Inside the ship, scattered around a blasted hull modeled after the real-life USS Cole, mannequins wired for sound call for help in the midst of the red glare of emergency lights. It all seems so real, as if it were an actual maritime siege, but it's not. Except for the enemy, that is. The enemy, fear, is real. So I thought that was interesting because it really encapsulates the danger of fear. You got to get the fear out. And, we might say, well, I'm not going to be sent over to Afghanistan or any of these. And you probably won't. But the battle is just as real. In our city, in our nation. In the end times, we will be facing things that, like I said, Yeshua said, will cause the hearts of men to fail them. How do you put yourself into a place where you're not one of those whose hearts fail them when the things come on this earth? How do you put yourself into a place where no matter what happens, you're not shaken by it? You're not moved. Things can be exploding all around you, but you're holding your place securely. Let's turn over to Deuteronomy chapter 20. There's so many scriptures in the Bible that talk about fear. You can go and do your own research at some point. But there's a reason why it's in there so much. Deuteronomy chapter 20. We'll start at verse 1. When you go forth to battle against your enemies and see horses and chariots and an army greater than your own. Now notice he says when, not if. It doesn't say if you go out to battle against your enemies and see. No, when. The enemy will try to bring things up that look bigger than you. He'll try to create smoke screens in front of you to how big some situation is. And it will seem like a giant in front of you. When you go forth to battle against your enemies and see horses and chariots and an army greater than your own, do not be afraid of them. Now, why is it that that's the first thing he would say? If it's not important, if fear does not matter in the midst of a battle, why would that be his first instruction to them? It's very important. Do not be afraid of them, for the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, is with you. Now, you could really pick that verse apart and see a lot of different things in there. He's saying the Lord your God is with you, but it's the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt. He's already proven himself faithful in your life. He's already proven himself to be the one who is delivering you. He's already proven himself in your life. So he's saying, don't be afraid of them, because that same one that did it then, he's with you now. And when you come near to battle, the priest shall approach and speak to the men and shall say to them, Hear, O Israel, you draw near this day to battle against your enemies. Let not your minds and hearts faint. Now, what would cause your minds and hearts to faint? Fear. Fear can cause people to quite literally pass out. Fear not, and do not tremble or be terrified and in dread because of them. For the Lord your God is he who goes with you to fight for you against your enemies to save you. Goes through to say the different people that you're to let go when you go into the battle. But verse 8, and the officer shall speak further to the people and say, What man is fearful and faint-hearted? Let him return to his house, lest because of him his brethren's minds and hearts faint, as does his own. Fear is contagious. Notice that if one person starts to be afraid in a situation, a lot of times it causes others in that situation to become afraid too. Even if they weren't before. Fear is contagious. You got to get it out. Let's turn over to Judges chapter 6. Judges chapter 6, verse 11. Now the angel of the Lord came and sat under the oak at Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abiezrite. And his son Gideon was beating wheat in the winepress to hide it from the Midianites. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, "The Lord is with you, you mighty man of fearless courage." Now that's an introduction. Notice the Lord always calls you who he's calling you to be, not who you are at the moment. He knows who you really are. And Gideon said to him, "O sir, if the Lord is with us, why has all this befallen us? And where are all his wondrous works of which our fathers told us, saying, Did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But now the Lord has forsaken us and given us into the hand of the Midian." Now that's not the response a mighty man of fearless courage would come out with. But notice the Lord didn't say anything to him, didn't address his questions, nothing. Verse 14, the Lord turned to him and said, "Go in this your might, and you shall save Israel from the hand of Midian. Have I not sent you?" Gideon said to him, so he's still protesting, "O Lord, how can I deliver Israel? Behold, my clan is the poorest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house." The Lord said to him, "Surely I will be with you, and you shall smite the Midianites as one man." And we know the rest of the story. He asks him, "Can you give me a sign? I'm going to put out this thing." But then it ends up being that, okay, well, he proves himself that, yeah, I am with you. And he gets to the point in chapter 7. Then Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and all the people who were with him rose early and encamped beside the spring of Harod. And the camp of Midian was north of them by the hill of Moreh in the valley. The Lord said to Gideon, "The people who are with you are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hands, lest Israel boast about themselves against me, saying, 'My own hand has delivered me.' So now proclaim in the ears of the men, saying, 'Whoever is fearful and trembling, let him turn back and depart from Mount Gilead.'" So right away, he deals with the fear. Nobody can be afraid in this battle. You got to get rid of the fear. And 22,000 of the men returned. Okay, so that was quite a bit of fear in there. 22,000 of the men returned, and 10,000 remained. That's more than half. That is an enormous amount of the troops that had fear. So they leave, and 10,000 remain. And the Lord said to Gideon, "The men are still too many. Bring them down to the water, and I will test them for you there. And he of whom I say to you, this man shall go with you, shall go with you. And he of whom I say to you, this man shall not go with you, shall not go." So he brought the men down to the water, and the Lord said to Gideon, "Everyone who laps up the water with his tongue as a dog laps it, you shall set by himself. Likewise, everyone who bows down on his knees to drink." And the number of those who lapped, putting their hand to their mouth, was 300 men. But all the rest of the people bowed down upon their knees to drink water. And the Lord said to Gideon, "With the 300 men who lapped, I will deliver you and give the Midianites into your hand." We know the rest of the story. That is exactly what happened. Now there's a weeding out of the troops that has to happen at this point, a sifting, where basically what he's doing is the same thing that the Navy SEALs do. 80% of the Navy SEALs that start out in that training program don't last beyond 4 weeks. Well, most of Gideon's troops did not last beyond those 2 tests. But the ones that did were the elite. They were the ones who were not afraid, and they were the ones who were aware. They were the ones who were not so into themselves that they were distracted. They were not easily distracted. They were focused. So this shows how important fear is to Yahweh. Mark 5:36 in the Passion says, it's talking about Jairus. We know that story of Jairus when he comes to Yeshua, "Come lay your hands upon my daughter that she may be healed." And then they're going, and while they're going, here comes the woman with the issue of blood, and she's healed. And then they're coming near the house, and then they say, "Don't trouble the master, your daughter's dead." Now, those words have the ability to strike fear to the heart of a parent. Your daughter is dead. That is the moment when you got to decide how you're going to respond. You can't allow fear to dictate. And in Mark 5:36, in the Passion, it says, but Yeshua refused to listen to what they were told and said to the Jewish official, don't yield to fear. All you need to do is keep on believing. Now, why would Yeshua say, don't yield to fear, don't fear, if it wasn't critical in the situation? If the girl's healing didn't depend on it. Everything depended on it. The outcome of the battle was based off of his response to fear. When the fear came, how did he handle it? Now, obviously, Jairus put it in the right perspective because his daughter was healed. He didn't allow the fear of what they told him. He didn't allow the fear of the doctor's report to strike his faith out. He didn't change his utterance. He made sure he was in the right place internally. Now, avoiding fear can only make it worse. You know, when I ride horses, one of the biggest things they say is if you fall off, get back on right away. Because the more you stay off the horse, the more your mind will paint even a completely different picture of the fall than it actually was. It will make it out to be much worse than it is. And then you'll start projecting that situation onto the future of your rides. And it's like, I fell off, so that means I'm going to fall off again. No, what does that have to do with the future? Just because something happened in the past, that doesn't mean that it's going to happen in your future. Anxiety is usually about something that you're imagining is going to happen in the future that hasn't even happened. You know, most fears are irrational, like I said. Most fears are of something that's never likely to happen. But it can literally paralyze someone. And it can hold them back from doing something that they were really called to do. It can really hold back your life. But if you start, and even in the natural, people say this, if you start gradually exposing yourself to the thing you're scared of, the thing that you're in fear of, it can help you overcome it. Now, not just exposing yourself in your own strength, with Yahweh on your side. With the power of Holy Spirit, he can help you overcome anything. You know, and if you face your fear, often you find it's not as scary as you thought. You know, when I was little, I had this, again, irrational fear of grates. I don't even know where it came from. I was never taught to be afraid. Mom and Dad never raised me to be afraid. But for some reason, from the time I was little, I would avoid walking over any grates in the path. Like, you know, like the bars that you could see down into the ground. So I would avoid those. But then it increased, because that's what fear does. It just increases, and it becomes more and more, to the point where I remember I was probably, 12 years old or so, maybe 13. And we were down in Florida. Dad was working down in Florida at the time, and Mom and I had gone with him. And we wanted to go and get a smoothie at Smoothie King. So we walked across this bridge to get it. I happened to be on the phone with her, talking with her at the time. But there was a little challenge with this bridge. It was a drawbridge. And if anybody knows anything about a drawbridge, the entire thing is made out of grate, you know, because they got to be able to lift it up and all that so you can see through to the water. And it's a pretty high bridge. I mean, it seemed pretty high to me. It probably wasn't all that high, but it seemed like it was like, I don't know, like the height of Mount Everest at the time. But I'm going to walk across the bridge, and I'm talking on the phone to her. And I had to hang up the phone because I'm like, I'm about to cross the bridge. I have got to hang up with you. But now logically, why did I have to hang up to cross over the bridge? Like, I can't walk and talk at the same time? Like, what changed that part of my walk from the walk before? Fear, exactly. It was fear. It was entirely fear. And it wasn't even logical, okay? So what am I afraid of? It's a grate. There, you can see through it. It doesn't seem stable because you can see through it. But passing by me on the side are all these cars driving over it. I weigh a lot less than a car, like a lot less. So, and the holes, like, okay, so the other fear could be, okay, I'm going to slip through the holes and go down into the water. But the holes are like about that big. I'm not going to slip through that. And I'm not as big as a car, but I'm not that tiny. So the fear itself is illogical. But I physically had to hang up the phone and hold on with both hands as I'm crossing over this bridge. And then she's laughing at me when we're going across it. But then yeah, that's what I mean. She was laughing as I was crossing over this bridge, hanging on with both hands. It's like, yeah, it like probably looked pretty foolish, and all the cars driving by are like, what is up with that girl? But I realized when we got on the other side, I've got to deal with this fear. I can't be living my life in fear of grades. Like, it seems so, it is even now, it seems so insignificant and so, like, illogical, irrational. But I really had to push myself. So I pushed myself when we came back, and I was like, I am not holding on to that railing. There's no need for me to hold on to the railing. There's a sidewalk. The sidewalk is for you to walk, and I can walk physically without holding on to things. It does not make me unsteady to walk without holding on to something. So I made myself walk over it a couple times, back and forth, until that paralyzed response was gone. And I think it was just a while later, we were in Israel, and we ended up going down an entire flight of great stairs. And I was like, if I hadn't dealt with it on that bridge, I probably wouldn't be going down these stairs. But that's just like and it's kind of a silly example, but fear is fear. And, you know, we can look at other people's fears or things that they might be afraid of and say, that's ridiculous. Well, turn it around and look at your own, all right? There's people who might be afraid of riding an elevator. That's a common fear. I'm afraid to ride an elevator. Well, look at it logically. Like, are you afraid of riding the elevator? Are you afraid of getting stuck in the elevator? What is the fear about? Are you afraid because you've watched some movie where the elevator just suddenly drops into a bottomless pit? Or, like, where was the root of the fear? Don't be watching those type of things, by the way. Don't be watching, you know, I mean, this isn't my point, but don't be watching horror movies. Don't be watching Dateline NBC. You know, they tell you all the crazy ways for people to die. Like, you just don't need to put those ideas in your mind. It can really mess with you, and it can cause you to fight a battle that you shouldn't have to fight. You were never meant to fight a battle over the most ridiculous thing happening, all right? Watch what you put before your eyes. But say you're afraid of getting stuck in an elevator. Well, look at it logically. How often do people actually get trapped in elevators? How often, I mean, does this elevator look broken? Now, if the elevator looks broken and there's like, hey, don't go on it. Like, there's some things in the natural that would be just wisdom. But if the elevator looks like, it doesn't look like it's broken, and is there any reason to think that if you got stuck that help would take a long time to arrive? No. If you start looking at all these things in the natural, it can make it seem like, oh yeah, that's nothing to be afraid of. But if you find yourself afraid to go on an elevator one day, well, start making yourself go on it. Every day. And the more you start making yourself do it, and you got to push yourself over that. Sometimes if the fear is intense enough, like, you've got to push yourself. Because, like, fear can be paralyzing. And especially, like, if you say you have a fear of heights and all that, and you got to push yourself beyond that. Because everything in your body might be locking up, but you can overcome the fear. It doesn't matter how much of a grip it has in your life. It doesn't matter how paralyzing it causes you how paralyzed it causes you to be. You can overcome it. But you have to put your will behind it. You have to say, I will overcome this. But if you start doing that, you got to face your fears, not run away from them. And if you find that there's a fear in your life, then you start make yourself do it. Just like what they do with those soldiers, okay? Now, I'm not saying that you're going to go into a simulated battle scene and all that, and maybe not that extreme. Life is a simulated battle. But in a controlled situation, to overcome a fear of heights, I would not necessarily jump out of an airplane and go skydiving. I think there's a lot of stuff that could go wrong with that. I'm not going to put myself into a potentially dangerous situation purposely. But I might push myself to go on an amusement ride that is really high up. And I have done that. And you have to push yourself through it. And it might seem silly. It might seem like, well, why are you doing this? You don't have to actually be on that ride. No, but I can use it to overcome my fear. And fear is something that you always want to overcome. Don't do it alone. Don't go and face your fears alone. Do it with Holy Spirit. If he's on your side, you say, he's with me, nothing is going to harm me. Nothing is going to hurt me. Some of the most common fears that people have: fear of heights, fear of animals, fear of flying, fear of bugs, fear of storms. It's like this big. You're this big. Yeah, how many times did you say that? How you are this big. This is this big. Yeah, but for some reason, people are fear of storms or weather. Fear of lightning. Like, what is the chance of you actually, if you're not doing something foolish like flying a kite out in the middle of a lightning storm? But fear of needles. How many people? Now, I just don't like them. I'm not going to go and say, just stab me for fun. Not going to do something like that, but I'm not afraid of them. Fear of confined spaces, fear of open spaces, fear of blood, fear of injury, fear of death, fear of tunnels, fear of bridges, there's a fear of just about everything. There is a fear about everything. But these can also be fears of fictional future situations that you play out in your mind. Like, logically, it's not going to happen, but your mind has it painted out to be, if I walk by that, this is going to happen, and this is going to happen, and that's all in your mind. And just thinking about that situation, that fictional situation, will cause you to feel anxious. Will cause you to have all these symptoms, and it literally can physically affect your body. The physical feelings of fear, it releases chemicals into your body. I was watching this thing that came up about this man, and he's not a believer, but he was talking about overcoming a fear of roller coasters. And I thought it was interesting. I was like, looking at this. Now, he had never been on a roller coaster. I think he was in his 50s or something. Never been on a roller coaster. His entire life, he was terrified of roller coasters. Well, what does Yeshua say? All their lifetime, they were subject to bondage through the haunting fear of death. So he decides when he's now in his 50s, I'm going to face the fear. I'm going to overcome it. So he goes to this park and he gets on this roller coaster. And I was showing it to Mom. It's just interesting. It was hilarious because he went through like the 5 stages of grief in that one roller coaster ride. It was just, I don't know. He was funny. He was going through the initial part where he's going up the hill and he's just like, I don't like this. I don't like this. I don't like this at all. I don't like this. Why did I do this? Okay, just breathe. Breathe. And then he starts talking to himself. See, sometimes you have to talk to yourself to get a hold of your racing mind. He said, you're going to breathe, and then you're going to shout. You're going to breathe and shout. Breathe and shout. And then he just starts going, ah! And then he's like, yeah, oh, ha, ha, ha. He just like starts laughing. And then he's like, I like roller coasters. I like roller coasters. I actually like this. Oh my gosh, I overcame it. And he goes from like, this entire ride was like a complete switch. But at the end, he's like, I didn't realize until I faced that initial fear and got myself beyond it. Wow, it's freeing. Like, I'm no longer being held back by this. I faced it, and now I see it's nothing to be afraid of. So that's just like, that's one example. But it's all about facing the fear. And when you actually are exposed to that, it can be terrifying. Like, that's why in the beginning, I don't like this. I don't like this. That's his initial response. But once he pushed himself beyond that, he realized there's a whole other plane. There's a whole other level. Yeah. See, that's confession. Confess the right things. Don't go into situations always saying, I'm afraid of this. I'm afraid of this. You go into this situation, I'm afraid of this. I'm afraid of this. You're just reinforcing your fear of it. But most people will try to go to great lengths to avoid the situations that cause those feelings of fear. You got to be one who purposely puts yourself in those places and address it. Don't allow any fear, no matter how small it might seem. Might say, well, it's just a little fear. A little fear, it will contaminate everything. Fear, it will cause you to ask questions like, will I make it? As soon as that thought starts to stick, your faith is in trouble. Faith does not question. It has complete confidence and trust in Yahweh. Like, he will do what he said he will do. He will take care of me. Just a few scriptures here. Joshua 1:9, have I not commanded you? See, it's a command. Be strong and of good courage. Do not be afraid, nor be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. No matter where you go, he's with you. Isaiah 35:4 says, say to those who are fearful-hearted, be strong, do not fear. Behold, your God will come with vengeance, with the recompense of God. He will come and save you. Isaiah 41:10 and 13. Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. Yes, I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. You know, the Psalm 91, where it says the angels will bear you up on their hands. They'll lift you up so you won't even dash your foot against a stone. For I, the Lord your God, will hold your right hand, and saying to you, fear not, I will help you. Psalm 34 says, I sought the Lord, and he answered me and delivered me from all my fears. How many fears? All my fears. How many fears are you supposed to have? None. Not supposed to have any. Those who look to him are radiant, and their faces shall never be ashamed. Psalm 23 says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Now, that's interesting. It doesn't say the valley of death. It says the valley of the shadow of death. Like Brother Copeland said, a shadow of a dog never bit anybody. A shadow can't hurt you. Fear can't hurt you. The fear of whatever you're afraid of, it can't hurt you. It's a shadow. Psalm 27. Now, Psalm 27 is the psalm for the month of Elul, which we're going to be coming into. It starts out with, the Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? Psalm 46, we have the song about that. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear. We will not fear. See, it's an act of your will. You will not fear. Though the earth gives way, though the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble at its swelling. Psalm 56 says, when I am afraid, I put my trust in you. Now, here's the progression that the psalmist is talking about here. When I'm afraid, I put my trust in you, first of all. Then he starts talking, and he says, in God whose word I praise, in God I trust, I will not be afraid. What can man do to me? So see, you start putting your confidence in God, you put your trust in God, it will lead you to the point where, wait, God, I'm trusting in God. Why do I need to be afraid? What can man do to me if God's protecting me? 1 Peter 5:7 speaks of casting all your cares. The Amplified goes on to say all your anxieties, all your worries, and all your concerns once and for all on him, for he cares about you with deepest affection and watches over you very carefully. So we got to change the way we're thinking about things. We got to start facing these things and start putting them in their right perspective, because that's not how Yahweh never meant for a child of God to live with fear. Yahweh never meant for us to be dealing with fear in our lives. Philippians 4:8 says, fix your thoughts on what is true and honorable and right and pure and lovely and admirable. Think about things that are excellent and worthy of praise. All starts in our thoughts. What are we thinking about? Are we keeping our eyes on him? Or are we looking at the circumstances? Are we looking at our fears and just allowing them to spiral us? We're not meant to live in fear. There is a difference between the child of God and the world that we're supposed to be walking in.
And when you think about it, a lot of times when it comes to fear, some of the fears that we deal with are not necessarily our fault, so to speak. Fear is a learned response. So like what Jordan was saying about not putting things before your eyes, don't watch a horror movie and stuff like that. Well, a lot of times, as a child, you've learned fears. So as an adult, you're dealing with fears that were planted in you as a child. necessarily, maybe were exposed to something, that they allowed you to watch that they never should have allowed you to watch, or you were in a situation, or even depending on what type of family that you were raised in, and how your type of family was, and what you were exposed to as a child. These fears can be learned fears. And then you grow up as an adult and you're having to deal with these fears. And you got to look at, okay, so like Jordan was saying, where's the root of these fears coming from? So like, for me personally, it was like, and I'll be totally honest, I'm not 100% over it, but I'm better. I have a fear of clowns. Okay? I do not like clowns. I'm not going to say I fear them. I don't like them. Now, there's a difference between not liking something and fearing something. Okay? Some people, they just don't like roller coasters. All right? Some people are afraid of roller coasters. I had a fear of clowns growing up. As a child, as a teenager, up into an adult, I had a fear of them. Now I'm at the point where I'm not afraid of them. I just don't like them. But that was instilled in me as a child because something that I was allowed to watch that never should have been allowed to watch. And that was a learned response to fear. And like she was saying, when you look at something, learned response, or you see somebody else react. All of a sudden, you're standing there with a group of friends and a bee flies by. And 9 of them take off running and screaming. Ah! Okay, well, what's your response? Oh, there's a bee comes by, we must run in fear. That must be what the response is, all right? Because everybody else is running in fear from it. But like Mom was saying, it's this tiny little thing. Reverse it, what they might be thinking when they see you, okay? But what does it come down to? Why is there a fear of that? You play it out further, it's like, well, if they land on me, they might sting me. And if they sting me, then it will hurt. And then if they do actually sting me, and the devil will just play with your mind. And if they do sting me, it might cause my arm to blow up. And then I might have to go to all this stuff the devil, right? Same thing as what happened with any type of fear. Now, this guy with the roller coasters, interesting point, where you can see where fear is a learned response. He had never even been on a roller coaster. Never had he even ridden on a roller coaster. He was afraid of something he never experienced. Well, where did that come from? Obviously, it came from somewhere. So, fears aren't necessarily, obviously they're bad, but they're not necessarily our fault. It's not necessarily we're the one that sat in front of that horror movie and subjected ourselves to that. We can learn it from childhood. But, when it comes to that too, when you look at it nowadays, and, like she was saying, we have got to stop letting the devil push us around with fear. We really have got to. Especially when we laugh and stuff with the bee story and everything, but how many times have we seen somebody be paralyzed because of a bee? They're no longer,
One flies in the car.
I've had that experience, okay? But not me personally. Somebody else that was driving, and a bee flew into the car, and all upset and stuff because the bee flew in the car and stuff and took their eyes off the road, and we went off the road. Okay, we jumped a curb, popped the tires in the car, and actually almost stopped right on the edge of an embankment that proceeded to a river, okay? All because a bee flew into the car. And you can, fear is not logical, but fear can be destructive. And fear can be life-costing if not handled and put in its proper perspective. So, we have got to stop letting the devil push us around with fear. Okay, we've got to stop allowing him throwing up something, and it completely paralyzes us, and we can't function at the moment. Not to go into details, but I was in a situation one time when I was in college, going to school at night, and I was in a situation, and in the midst of that situation, I have to say, it was the first time I ever experienced 100% true fear. And it paralyzed me to the point where I couldn't move. I was trying to get my hand to move to open the door, and I was shaking so bad because of fear, I could not get it was like my brain would not connect to my hand to get that door open so I could get out of the situation. Now the situation turned and stuff like that, not by my doing, by some other people that ended up showing up, but fear paralyzed where I could not get myself to act. I couldn't make the right decision. I could not get myself to act. And that's how serious fear is if we allow it to dominate us. Like Jordan was saying, we have got to get control of the fear. And how do we do that? You got to know who you are and who your God is, okay? We're no longer slaves to fear. We sing that song all the time. You're no longer a slave to fear. You're a child of God. When we do, we live in a world where, especially right now, there is just fear all over the place. There's fear all over the place. You can't even, go down to Market Basket without hearing something that's happened or hearing people talk or whatever. There's fear all over the place. But it's how are we going to be in the midst of it? How are we going to respond? How are we going to handle it? Like Jordan was saying, that how fear is contagious. But think about it. Have you ever been in a situation and something's happening and all the people around you are just like in chaos? Okay, they're in fear, they're in chaos, and you're feeling it start to come upon yourself. But all of a sudden, a particular individual walks into the room, and all of a sudden it's like, everything's going to be all right. Just because you saw that one person. But what was it about that one person? They weren't reacting the way everybody else was reacting. That one person was carrying with them a sense of shalom, a sense of peace, a sense of, you know what, I'm taking authority over this situation. And when you just looked at that individual and they carried with them that shalom. And you instantly went from almost getting caught up in the contagiousness of fear, and you went into, you know what, all is well. Everything's going to be all right. All is well now. I have to say that I've experienced that quite a few times early on when Australia was little and being in certain doctor situations and hospital situations, just having Mom with me. And now I know faith, I know the word. Mom's taught me very well, especially when Australia was a baby, what I need to be focused on and decreeing and declaring and stuff. But in times that she came with me in certain situations, there was that extra, Mom's here, everything's going to be all right. There was the shalom, there was the peace. Why? Because she was the anchor to keep me anchored to what was the truth. To keep me anchored on this. We don't go by what we see. We go by the unseen. Like the story with Yeshua with the fig tree. Okay? He walked by that fig tree and he cursed it. The Bible says that he cursed it at its roots. Okay? He cursed it at its roots, and that fig tree started to die from the roots up. It started working in the unseen realm. It was in the invisible realm. Those words went to work right away. And instantly, those roots started to dry up. The disciples couldn't see it. It wasn't just because it was in the unseen realm, just because it was in the invisible, didn't mean it wasn't working. It started going to work right away. But then what happened the next day when they walked by it again? They came upon a fig tree that was died and withered up. Why? Because what was working in the unseen realm now came to the surface and worked in the seen realm. And it all started in the unseen. Just because you don't see it doesn't mean it's not working. Okay? And so they saw the invisible became visible. Okay, the unseen became seen by words that originally started and spoke to that unseen realm. And that's where it starts. And just because that fig tree was dying, even though they couldn't see it, they couldn't see any effects of that fig tree immediately start dying, that fig tree was immediately starting to die. And then it came to fruition when they saw it in the seen realm. Well, you know what? When you speak to fear, when you speak to whatever is causing that fear, what you speak to the spider or the elevator or the roller coaster or whatever it is, just because it may not feel like or seem like it's starting to work, our words have power. Our words have power. And like she said, we have not been given a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and a sound mind. Fear cannot operate in a sound mind. So, when it comes to fear, well, how do we fight it? Well, obviously we fight it with the word. Obviously, opposite of fear is what? Faith. You cannot be in faith and have fear, okay? You cannot be in fear and think your faith is going to work. Because if you're in fear and you don't get control of it, you're going to allow that fear to override any type of faith, any type of what the word, it's going to paralyze your faith. What does fear do? It paralyzes. So just like as fear is contagious, well, there's a vaccine, so to speak, a remedy, so to speak, and it's shalom. It's what we know is peace, but it's shalom. We know that the Hebrew word for peace is shalom. And in this camp, we're very well versed in what shalom is. But just to go over it again, shalom covers every aspect possible in your life. Every single aspect possible in your life. Shalom is wholeness, it's completeness, it's soundness, it's health, okay? And like I said, every aspect. So it's wholeness in your health, it's wholeness in your finances, it's wholeness in your family, it's wholeness in your body. It's wholeness when fear's trying to come upon you. Shalom, wholeness, completeness, soundness, health, safety, prosperity. Shalom, when you're operating out of a position of shalom that comes from only Him, shalom carries with it an implication of permanence. This is how it's supposed to be. This is how it's supposed to be. What do we learn from Pastor George, and I know a few of us say it every day, but it's like, we refuse fear. You refuse something. Just because the UPS guy comes to your door with a package and asks you to sign for it, you don't have to accept it. You can refuse the package, especially if it's not something that you ordered or something that you wanted. Better yet, just because a doctor prescribes a medication for you doesn't mean you have to accept it. You can refuse it, okay? You can deny it, all right? You can refuse whatever. We refuse fear. We refuse stress. What did Pastor George say? We refuse worry, but instead we choose to enter into what? Rest, which comes from shalom. That rest is shalom. That's what Yahweh is talking about. You enter into my rest. He's talking about you enter into my shalom. You enter into everything that I am. Wholeness and completeness and well-being. It's flourishing. Shalom means flourishing. It means delight, okay? But shalom also means lack of conflict, okay? Now, shalom does not erase that the conflict is happening. Shalom gives you the response on how to deal in the midst of that conflict, right in the midst of that situation. That's actually one of my scriptures. But, the meaning of shalom is connection to Yahweh. It's who He is. And we need to live in this constant position of shalom. When you say shalom to somebody, a lot of us in here say shalom, shalom, Shabbat shalom. Actually, I have a little something interesting on that I was going to read. But when you greet someone or say goodbye to someone saying shalom, you are literally saying to them, may you be full of well-being. Or may health and prosperity be upon you. When you say shalom to somebody, you're extending a blessing onto them. Nothing missing, nothing broken, life and wholeness, completely, 100% when you say shalom to somebody. So let's actually turn to Isaiah 26. It's just a few scriptures. And like Jordan said about the fear, I encourage you, go and look up the scriptures on shalom. All right, there's so much that Yahweh says about His peace in the Bible, His shalom. And I believe it's Keith Moore who has an excellent teaching on stay in peace, or it's called something like that, peace of God. I'm going to encourage you to listen to that. But Isaiah 26, verse 3 says, you will guard him and keep him in perfect and constant peace. Now think of that. You hear something about, well, I'll guard you. Well, how do most people guard you with something? I'll guard you with a shield. I'll guard you, which he does. But he's talking here, well, I will guard you with peace. I will guard you and keep you in perfect and constant peace. But there's something you've got to do. What does it say further? Whose mind, both its inclination and its character, is stayed on you. Because he commits himself to you, leans on you, and confidently and hopes confidently in you. When you keep your mind fixed on Yahweh, your mind is stayed on him, then you'll live in this constant shalom. He says right there, I will guard you. I will keep you in perfect and constant peace. Verse 4 says, so trust in the Lord. Commit yourself to him forever, for the Lord is an everlasting rock. Jump down to verse 7. The way of the consistently righteous, those living in moral and spiritual rectitude in every area and relationship of their lives. Okay, catch that. In every area and relationship of their lives is level and straight. You, O Lord, who are upright, direct aright and make level the path of the uncompromisingly just and righteous. But you've got to be living a certain way. We've talked about that over the last few weeks, that, we need to be living in a position of obedience. We need to be living in a state of hearing and obeying. Okay? 100% hearing and obeying. Even when it seems like it's some tiny little thing, you don't know the impact that it might have on the situation or the impact it might have on an individual. But part of getting a position of shalom is you've got to be in a position of obedience. You've got to be in a position of hearing and obeying and being able to discern things correctly. And the minute he tells you to do something, you may be all set to 100%. You're about to do something, and you're about to do it and do it and do it. And if that last minute he says to you, whoa, the ball game's changed. I don't want you doing this anymore. You've got to be obedient and open. Exactly. You have to be obedient and open to instantly be like, nope. If he said it, that settles it. Okay, he said no. The answer is no. I stop it right here. But whether you understand it or not, actually, I shared this with Mom yesterday. This little story that had taken place when I'd gone out to the supermarket on Thursday night. And it was 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and I had turned onto our swamp road to head down. And there's one house on that, well, two houses technically, but there's the last house on that road is this little ranch, and I was coming up to the driveway. And as I was driving up to the driveway, I was driving a little bit faster than I probably should have been because I was crunched for time, which is not an excuse. But instantly I heard Holy Spirit say, take your foot off the pedal. So I took my foot off the pedal, and the truck instantly started slowing down. And all of a sudden, this deer, full speed, right across the road, only like 10 feet in front of my truck. Now, if I hadn't have taken my foot off the pedal, I would have been in disobedience and opened the door to possibly something having to take place. But, he ran across, and I know, being married to a guy that's so nature and wildlife, most of the times there's just not one of them. So if one runs out in front of you, you come to a stop because there's probably another one or a couple more sitting there waiting to cross the road. So I actually came down to a stop, and I looked to the left, and sure enough, there was another one sitting right there that had been about ready to jump also, but it stopped. And when she saw me, she ran a few more feet into the road. So I was like, okay. So I continued on. And as I was just starting, a car came around the corner, this little sedan light coming towards me. Now, I was saying to Mom, not being prideful or bragging or anything like this, but this is obedience because this was so out of my box. I don't think I've ever flagged a person down in my entire life because that is just out of my box. I have never done that. But I heard Holy Spirit say to them, tell them about the deer. So I thought, okay, and I've never experienced that either. So I came to a stop, and the guy was approaching me, and I put my window down, and I started waving at him, and he didn't see me right at that moment. He just passed me, and he noticed I was trying to get his attention. So he backed up, and he came, and he stopped next to me, and I was like, hi. I said, I just wanted to let you know, right there, right back there at the road, I just had a deer come running across, but there's another one sitting there on the side, and I don't know if he's about to run out across the road too. And the guy was like, oh, really? He's like, oh, thank you so much. I said, you're welcome. And then he was like, I just had a big black bear run out in front of me not too long back. And I was like, oh, yeah, we had one in our yard last week. And so just as I said that to him, he looked up, and when he looked up, the other deer came running across the road. And he's like, oh, look, the other one is running across the road right now. If I hadn't have flagged him down, if Holy Spirit had not flagged, told me, stop that car that's coming, he would have been at that time with that deer running right there. And who knows what the situation could have been. But I had stopped him so that the deer just ran across the road and there was no occurrence. And he was like, oh, thank you so much. He thanked me again. And I said, oh, you're welcome. And then I was telling Scott, and then he looked at me and he was like, okay, I'll see you later. And I'm like, okay, bye. I've never even met you before. I don't know who you are, but yeah, sure, I'll see you later. And I continued on. But that was something that was so out of my box and was not in the natural, normally who I am. I did not allow that to override what Holy Spirit was telling me to do. Because at that moment, it wasn't impacting me. I had the potential to impact another individual. It was a warning set out to that other individual to potentially save them. So that's why it's so important that we be living in a state of obedience, a state of listening and obeying. And that's what helps us to get into a position of shalom. And when we know, when Yahweh calls you to do something, there's a difference. When you're faced with something and Yahweh is there, there's instantly this sense of shalom. You're making the right decision. This is right. This is right. But if there's a situation that's fear-based, that's anxiety-based, that's causing chaos in your life, re-examine it. Because he's not going to necessarily, Yahweh's not going to call you into doing something that you're not prepared to do, that you're not in position to do. He knows when you're out of position before you know when you're out of position, okay? But when he calls us to do something, he's going to equip us to do it. He's going to provide for us to do it. And he's going to protect us while we're in the midst of doing that. So a few more scriptures just to look at is Colossians 3:15. And these are things that he's saying to you to do, do these things. These aren't suggestions. He's saying to do this. So Colossians 3, verse 15 says, and let the peace, soul harmony, which comes from Yeshua, rule, act as umpire continually in your hearts. Now catch that. He's saying, let peace, let shalom act as the umpire in your hearts, okay? We've got to get out of our head and operate out of our heart. Deciding and settling with finality all questions that arise in your minds in that peaceful state to which as members of Yeshua's one body, you are also called to live and be thankful, appreciative, giving praise to Yahweh always. Let peace be the umpire in our hearts. We all know what umpires are. Okay, they're the official of the game. They're the one that, sets the rules and says how this is going to go. Let shalom set the rule for you. Let shalom tell you this is how this is going to go, and it's going to end up in victory. We're more than conquerors. We can do all things through Yeshua who strengthens us. And then one more in 2 Thessalonians. I'm going the right way. 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 16. And it says, "Now may the Lord of peace himself grant you his peace." In the Amplified, it says, the peace of his kingdom. Now get that. The king is granting you the shalom of his kingdom. Okay? At all times and in all ways, under all circumstances and conditions, whatever comes. Whatever comes, whatever situation you may find yourself in, whatever circumstance you may find yourself in, whatever it may be, whatever doctor's report you may find you receive, whatever, report from the banker that they try to tell you, you know what? He's granted you the shalom of his entire kingdom. And you have that at all times, no matter what comes your way. No matter what comes your way, you have the shalom of the kingdom. And then the final one is Proverbs 28. Mom had said this earlier. Proverbs 28, verse 14. And this is how we're supposed to be at all times, in every situation. "Blessed, happy, fortunate, and to be envied is the man who reverently and worshipfully fears the Lord at all times, regardless of circumstances. But he who hardens his heart will fall into calamity." The other one says that he will have a continual feast regardless of circumstances. Regardless of what's going on, because of shalom, you will have a continuous feast. And because we're a people that worshipfully fear and reverently worshipfully fear him, will we be blessed in every situation. And that's what shalom is. Shalom's nothing missing, nothing broken, life in wholeness, completeness in every area of our lives. So just something I wanted to end with that I had come across that I thought was pretty interesting. And it comes when, when I was mentioning before about how we say Shabbat Shalom to people. And so when you hear, the word Shabbat Shalom, and now that, we understand what Shalom is, and this is what this article is saying, it's a beautiful revelation when we combine it with the meaning of Shabbat. By doing so, it can bring new life to one of the 10 commandments to honor the Sabbath. The Hebrew word Shabbat comes from the Hebrew word lashbot, which means to stop, or the Hebrew word lashavet, which means to sit. How appropriate. Our lives are on the move, especially nowadays. There are always places to go and things to do. When we continue to live a nonstop lifestyle, things become stressful, priorities begin to shift, and our focus on Yahweh can easily fade. The Lord knew that we would need to stop and to sit on a weekly basis, not for his sake, but for ours. So shalom and rest. For those of us who like to get things done, this is a challenging decision. If we are honest, it's often not a decision of taking a day off, but a decision of to trust Yahweh. Do we trust that he is able to do for us in 6 days what would take us 7 days to complete? Do we trust him enough to help us prioritize our lives and live the best life he designed for us? When we try to do everything by ourselves, we are really struggling with trust issues. We often just work harder trying to make whole the things in our lives that we have lost or that we are afraid to lose. Here you come again, fear. Okay, fear is not just a fear of a spider or a fear of roller coasters. You can have a fear over something that you may lose. Okay, you could have the fear of losing a friend, a fear of losing a child, a fear of losing money. Fear encompasses so many things. In the long run, this rarely works. Enter the word shalom. What if one day a week we focused not just a day of rest, but a day of getting our wholeness restored? What if weekly we could completely fill our life tank in our bodies, hearts, and minds? That is what true shalom does if we allow it. When our peace is full and overflowing, we are able to trust him to restore what we may have lost during the week. We can confidently move forward and hope that we will have all that we need in the week ahead. This is what Shabbat is for. Shabbat is for shalom. Shabbat shalom. Every Friday evening in Israel and Jewish communities around the world, you'll hear the joyful Shabbat Shalom. Again, this is more than a greeting. Its intent is a hope to encourage others to enter the weekly time of restoration and of making things whole that was appointed by Yahweh. Despite all the craziness throughout the week, Shabbat Shalom is saying, may you end the week with a rest that brings that inner peace that recenters us on the one who gives it. And also, may your next week begin with that sense of inner rest and completeness where nothing is lacking. At its very core, that is what Shabbat is about. While the modern understanding of peace is looking for a break from life's turmoil, a biblical peace addresses our hearts. With this Hebrew thought of shalom in mind, and we know this one, the blessing that Aaron gave in Numbers, speak to Aaron and to his sons, saying, thus you shall bless the sons of Israel. You shall say to them, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance on you and give you what? Shalom. The context of the blessing is ironic. Yahweh told Aaron to bless Israel with shalom while they were getting ready to go conquer the promised land. If peace means the absence of war, then this doesn't make sense, since they would soon be destroying cities. Yahweh was referring to an inner peace and completeness brought on by sharing in his countenance and in his protection. That was the blessing that Israel needed. And that's the blessing that he's given to us. You know, sometimes there's things in life that we're in a battle. It feels like we're entering into a war in some situations that may occur in life. But he has already given us that inner shalom to get through it. He's already given us that completeness and his countenance and protection. And then it says shalom in the battle. Israel was to rarely experience times of outward shalom, but even in the midst of battle, they were to have an inward rest brought on by the presence of the Lord, regardless of the outward circumstances. So it should be for us as well. It is Yahweh who is giving shalom to Israel. It is Yahweh who is giving shalom to us today. Which will we choose? Will we focus on conflict and stress and fear around us, or will we choose to live and walk in the shalom that is offered to us? We are able to be at full shalom in our hearts, even while dealing with the seemingly messy chaos of life events surrounding us. In the biblical Hebrew understanding of shalom, there is a point at which you have so much shalom that it spills out from you and is rendered to others. So we should be filled with so much shalom, okay, that we're changing the atmosphere around us. So that we walk into a situation where something's going on, we're that one person in the midst of all the people being contagious by fear. We're that one person that walks into that situation and carries that shalom and instantly changes the atmosphere around us. So like we were saying, you know, fear can be contagious, but shalom can be the vaccine to fear. We just need to make sure that we know how to operate in it. We need to make sure we're staying in position so that we can operate in it. And most importantly, we need to be making sure that we're keeping our connection with him as tight as ever. Now is not the time to slack off on things with Yahweh. Now is not the time to slack off on reading the word or slack off on doing your confessions and declarations. Now is not the time to slack off on listening to teachings. You know, now is not the time to not be spending time fellowshipping with him. Okay? Now is the time to pull up our boots, get up and get ready. You know, get up and get ready when you're supposed to be getting up and getting ready every morning in the day, and spending that quality time with Yahweh. That's where we get filled up. That's where we can go into situations and know that all is well, because we know who we carry. That's why we can go into an area or a circumstance knowing who we are and whose we are. And no matter what the enemy tries, the wicked one cannot touch us. Amen.
Well, thank you for those of you who joined us. We trust you got something out of this message that you'll apply to your life. We will see you on Tuesday night at 7 p.m. Until then, you have a blessed week.